Hi guys, it's Oli from Rad Season. I'm joined today by British endurance athlete Nick Butter. Nick's completed an amazing feat of running a marathon distance in every single country in the world. That's 196 countries, which is absolutely incredible. Nick, thanks for coming on the show today.
No, thank you very much for having me, Ollie. Yeah, no, it's a pleasure.
Whereabouts are you at the moment, Nick?
I am down south. I live in a van, so I'm by the seaside whenever I can, and whenever I've got time, I gravitate towards the beach and the ocean. I'm in the UK, down in Cornwall. Trying to soak up as much of the sun and the sea as possible.
And how's it been going down there? What's the situation like?
Yeah, right. I was down here for quite a bit of lockdown. I was mid-tour and we got locked down, and so down here was completely dead, and now it's the absolute opposite. It is very, very busy. Over the last couple of weeks, I actually had a bit of a mild panic that I might have had the dreaded COVID, but I went and got tested a couple of days ago, and I don't. So it was a little bit of a scare, but I'm all good now. But there's a lot of people out, and the sun is shining, good waves. Had a little bit of a surf, did my morning run with another chap who actually been following my journey and happened to pull up in his van alongside me. And so we met and said hello and went for a run in the morning with the dog. And yeah, all good. I'm just trying to fill in as much of kind of my downtime as possible before everything gets a little bit mental again when the world properly restarts itself. Yeah.
Good stuff. And so are you kind of mixing between running and surfing and?
Yeah, it's running. Running is always going to be the main thing. Surfing for me is I'm absolutely rubbish. I'm terrible. But I love to be in the water and kind of spending time with my brother and my family as well. Just because I was actually supposed to be in Malawi at the moment, doing my next kind of mini expedition running north to south of Malawi, but that's happening potentially now later in the year or even next year, depending on what happens, because they have a new president coming in and he's just completely locked stuff down even further. So wow. So yeah, there's a potential that we're swapping it out, and by the end of the month I might even be doing a little bit of something else. So we'll see.
Nice. And why did you pick Cornwall? Are you have you got family down there, or like is that kind of?
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, we've had a couple of apartments down here. I've always been here. It's basically home now, really. It feels, because we live in a van, you can be anywhere you like. And so why don't you be by some of the best beaches? So, and I've got friends all over the place here, and especially because of my little puppy, Poppy, my little Wiesler. I've made lots of great running with dogs friends. So yeah, this is home now, really. It's weird because I don't really have a fixed home now. I can be anywhere. And if it wasn't for the lockdown, I'd be or if it wasn't for COVID, I'd be in Malawi. And if I wasn't going to be in Malawi and I could fly, I'd probably be in Bali. So yeah, this is kind of like the substitute.
Nice. And yeah, I guess I'd love to take it back to where you grew up and how you got into running, and what, like, yeah, how did that all begin for you?
So running for me was, well, famously my old headmaster of my middle school famously said that I was not a natural runner. In my school, he was a headmaster but also did my PE, and he said, yeah, you're really not a natural runner. And he's probably very right, but I was definitely persistent and determined with it, and I was always pretty good at cross country. Always doing, I mean, I'm always winning that, and so I definitely feel like I've got sport in there. But I grew up in the countryside. I grew up in Dorset, in Cranbourne, a tiny little village in the middle of nowhere, and so getting to my friends, I'd have to cycle to see them, and I had to cycle to school as well. And so that kind of 45-minute cycle every morning and every evening, or 10-mile run every now and then, if I didn't cycle it, that then started to kind of, unbeknownst to me, and create some endurance within me. But then running really wasn't in my, you know, in my day-to-day at all for until my 20s. I got out of school, and then I was in the very fortunate to be in the under-19s ski team, the Snow Sports England ski team, and therefore I was actually doing a lot of skiing, and skiing was my love and my life. Everything I did was for skiing. And then I had the voice of my parents on my shoulder telling me that actually you should probably get a real job, because that's not going to pay you any money and it's a young man's game, and they were very right. But at the same time, I still love skiing, and it was very difficult to not do that. But then I eventually got a job in finance, in banking, which was not me, but it earned some money, and therefore I made, I made that my world for a little while, far too long, probably about 8 years. And in that period, I just started to run more. And I was running, I think, as a lot of people do, for therapy. I wasn't necessarily very good at it. I started to run longer distances. You then start to kind of race yourself against your own times and start to get better. You start to then read some blogs and read some forums and get some magazines. And then, you know, one thing leads to another. And I had an opportunity I was winning some good races and finishing really highly in a lot of ultras. And therefore, I had some brands approach me and say, would you like to go and do this race? Would you like to do that race? Would you like to go and, you know, go into another country and run with us? And I had to turn those down because I was running, because I was working, and that meant that I couldn't run. And I thought, you know what, that's not right. I need to make a change. And it took me a good 3 years, I think, from realizing that to then being out in the desert, the Sahara Desert. I was running the infamous Marathon Des Sables, which is a 7-day race through the 50-odd degree heat, with about 1,000 people running through the Sahara Desert. And I met this guy Kevin, and Kevin was 50 at the time, and he was the moment that kind of pushed me over the edge. So if you like, I've had a lot of people in my life that have kind of pushed me to that cliff of adventure, and they wanted me to go and do something that was slightly different. And Kevin was the kind of the real big shove towards the end. And Kevin had terminal prostate cancer, and he told me this in a story while we were trudging through the desert. And I was like, you have terminal prostate cancer. He was given 2 years to live, and it kind of just made everything twig for me. You know, he was so happy because he understood the value of life. And so then, therefore, I was like, you know what, I'm going to do something big for him. And at that point, I was out of work. I was in running already, thought I was living the dream. But then Kevin kind of said, you know what, well, what do you really want to do? And I thought, well, I'd like to go and do something that nobody'd ever done in the running world, and kind of give it my all and kind of be known for it. And then I realized I Googled it, and nobody had ran a marathon in every country in the world. And then from that moment, 2 years passed of me planning, and have decided that I was going to go and run this massive marathon and hopefully raise some money for Prostate Cancer UK. And now we're here, and I did it. So I suppose that's the arc of my life so far.
That's amazing. And how did you? Yeah, I guess going from doing those races and from training and, you know, from running Marathon Des Sables to going, you know what, after getting inspired by Kevin, I'm just going to go and run every country in the world. I mean, even going to every country in the world, right, is pretty challenging, planning and all this, the everything logistical about doing that trip. So how did that begin from sort of the idea to then setting off?
It was quite, I think, you know, when anyone decides they're going to do something, whether it's moving house, whether it's changing job, whether it's, you know, there's so many kind of steps in everybody's life. And I think once you have it in your head that you've made your mind up, and that will only ever happen internally, I think, you know, you can talk to people about it, but until you've made your mind up that you're going to do that, you get to the next level. And I was kind of 3 weeks after meeting Kevin and getting back from that desert, and I was having Googled it and kind of registered the record with Guinness, and I thought, right, so it's probably time to tell other people that I want to do this now and try and make it work. And so I sat my parents down and I said, I'm going to run a marathon in every country in the world. And to be honest, they weren't really that shocked, because I'm always doing crazy things and wanting to do stuff. You know, I've done other running challenges of long distances and other mini records, and so they were like, right, well, this is definitely the biggest. Had I known, because I was like, you know, we've been to the moon, why has nobody done this? Like, come on, am I just like winning this massive prize by just seeing this? And I now know why nobody's done it, because it's so difficult. From an endurance perspective, in general. So when I say in general, I'm talking about financial logistics, obviously physical logistics and endurance. But then you've got all of the actual visas, you've got the safety, you've got the plane journeys. It's, there's a whole range of reasons why it could go wrong. And so the first thing I did was find out how many countries there were, because I didn't know. And I think that was a big shocker for me, because there were so many uncertain countries. I just thought there was this, definitive list. And so there was effectively between 193 and 195 that were countries and were registered with the UN and officially recognized by the UN, should I say. And then there was another couple on top of that, and maybe another couple more on top of that, which weren't officially countries, but maybe were countries. And so I didn't want to go and do this record and then have the wrong number. So that took a little bit of time and understand. And in that 2-year period, 3 of those countries changed their name. And so there was a lot of confusion with that when we were talking about flights. And then I went to a travel agent and I said, can you plot me a route to every country in the world? That's going to be the quickest, because we needed to do this as a record. And they were helpful on paper. They put everything together and I thought, yeah, that's brilliant. And then you look at it in more detail and you think, well, I can't go from that country to that country because the flights just don't exist. You can't go from that one to that country because it's impossible politically, because they won't allow you in. And I can't go from that country to that country next because it doesn't make any kind of sense geographically. And sometimes there's countries that there's so much what's the word, uncertainty and volatility within the politics that you shouldn't do them one after another, because of the you then screw up all of your flights. We're trying to book every single place at one go, and then if one of them goes wrong, that's it, gone. So we had to be really careful with that. And so after that, a long 2 years, I dedicated all of my time to making sure this planning was together. And a great friend of mine called Jeff Smith, who has a great non-profit company called Big Moose, I went to see him and his family over dinner one evening. And I also met him when I met Kevin in the desert, by the way. And I said, I'm going to do this thing for Kevin for prostate cancer. And he said to me, well, you've got to find somebody to work with you that will be an assistant or be a manager in some way, because you can't do all of this yourself. And over that 2 years, we grew from me planning it for about 9 months to the remainder of that time having built up a team of about 19 people before we left. And that was everything from psychologists, nutritionists, security advisors, everything. And we were like, yeah, we think we can, I felt like I'd thought of every angle and it was going to be, we were going to do this well. Now, having done it, it's like I had no idea what I was doing, because I had no idea what I was doing. And yeah, if I was to do it again, I would change quite a lot about the project, and yet we still managed to finish it. And my dad and my parent and my mum actually ended up being huge parts of the journey, which wasn't the plan. They were, I traveled on my own and I had to rely on somebody to make sure all my flights were linked up. And I thought that you would book, you'd have the whole schedule from day one, and you'd then go from A to B to C to D and finish it. But I mean, that went out the window within the first 3 weeks, I think, because we had 60 odd cancellations. There's all sorts of wars going on in different places. There was visas we didn't get. I had to go through 9 passports because of the sheer logistics of having access to countries. And so those 2 years was probably logistically as difficult as the actual 2 years of planning it, of doing it, because there was so much uncertainty, and then it just kind of spiraled from there until I just about clinched it in November.
And was there times where things just didn't go obviously according to plan, and then you thought, okay, well, instead of going to that country, I'm going to go to a different one, and then that kind of thing?
Yeah, there was a lot of that. We ended up, I spent a fortune on a nice snazzy website and having a tracker and everything like that. And that's just basically died because I was in Africa where the tracker wasn't working. And then mostly it was my first leg of Africa. So I did North America. Canada was country number 1, and went basically south from there until I finished all of the Americas. And then after that, that's when things got really, really tricky, because countries were either in war or airlines were going bust. We had that quite a lot, more than you would imagine. And so places that used to fly from A to B, that just didn't exist anymore. And so we'd have to go somewhere else. And frequently I'd have the phone call saying, you can't get your designated flight to such and such because that city is currently under siege, or it's there's no UN support, or the person that we've had contact with says you shouldn't go there now, or by the way, your flight's cancelled, can you get to the airport now, like immediately? And I've been waking up at like 1 o'clock in the morning to get to the airport, and all that sort of stuff. And that happened. I mean, the reason I'm not giving specific stories is because it happened virtually every week. If not more than once every week. Just things just never went to plan, which was the new plan. You just kind of have to adapt to it. And we have this beautiful spreadsheet which has so many lines of, because with the, I had to understand when I was landing, what time it was for me, what time my body clock was saying it was going to be, what time in the country versus the last place. How many miles I was traveling, so I understood if I was going to have a 4-hour flight or a 20-minute flight, that kind of stuff. So I knew whether I need food on the plane. And for that reason, I can't remember off the top of my head, I think there was 80 days out of the 674 days where I didn't have food at all. Not 80 days consecutively, but 80 individual days where I didn't eat anything, simply because of my logistics within the day meant that I was not easily accessing food. So if I was leaving at 4 a.m. in a hotel in somewhere in, I don't know, let's say Rwanda, no food easily accessible. Get to the plane, don't give you plane food like many other places, therefore that's gone. Maybe I can have a Mars bar in the airport if I'm lucky, probably not. That's gone. And then by the time I get there, I either need to go to sleep or run a marathon. And then before I know it, the end of the day's happened and I haven't eaten. And so that sort of stuff kind of all came and went. So it was a kind of a concoction of things that went wrong all the time.
And was there any like dates where you had to make? So were there any like organized events or races where you were committed, or or was it kind of loose?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that was a big bane of the trip, actually, bane of my life, because there was some key dates. So the reason why we decided not to go and do all official marathons right at the very beginning was, number one, there's a lot of countries without official marathons. Mm-hmm. So it kind of felt silly just doing most of them, and then there's just some that aren't. Also, before I left, I'd already done 400 and 500 and something marathons already. And I've done lots of official races all over the world. And so I kind of thought, I don't really want to do that. I was kind of over the whole organized kind of monetizing the whole marathon concept, and thought, actually, I'd rather just go and run in a city and meet a load of new people. Because the idea was I was going to stay with local people. They would show me around and I'd get to experience it for real, as opposed to a mass race, which isn't, in my opinion, the best way to see a city in its authenticity. And so we decided, let's just run our individual routes with people helping us. And it turned out to be one of the best bits of the trip. I always say that the people were the best thing about the journey, and I wouldn't have had that experience if I ran organized races. But there were a handful of races so for example, North Korea, the only really way to access North Korea as a Brit is to go and run the official Pyongyang Marathon. Mm-hmm. And that's on the 8th of April. But in April, I was in South America. And so my journey from Peru to North Korea and back again was to finish off South America and go to Ecuador, was 11 flights over a 6 days. And I did 3 marathons in 3 countries. And, you've got running on close to the equator in Ecuador, for example, and near Peru. And then you've got snow in North Korea. And so that kind of stuff. So you're absolutely right. Those kind of key events really did screw with the timeline, because it was like, he's doing that South America now. Then all of a sudden I'm going to North Korea and then coming back again. And obviously getting into North Korea is not easy either. So all of that stuff was quite stressful. And then I did the majors. That was quite important to get those done, because I thought, well, if I'm going to run around the world, then let's get the majors in. That caused more headache and more harm than good, really, just because of the logistics. And there was another, I'd say, handful, half a dozen of dates that we had to hit in order for things not to seriously go wrong.
Right. And then going from like looking at the logistics to, like you were saying, with everything changing and then sorting out nutrition and resting, was there something like when were you actually running? Was it every sort of third day, or like what was the sort of schedule that you had in mind?
Yeah, the average, so throughout the whole project, I was running every 2.4 days, which is to be exact. But obviously you can't have half a day. So on the whole, I would say 60% of my time I was running every other day. And then there was a group of countries, about 10 or 12, maybe 15 countries that I wanted more time in. And those countries, the places like South Africa, the US, Peru, there was a few more that I wanted more than just a couple of days. And so I'd stay for 5 or maybe 8 days sometimes. And that would always be planned around waiting for passports to be delivered or waiting for visa access, or to give my body a break. So in a 7-day week, I was usually doing 3 marathons in 3 different countries. But sometimes that would flex to 5 at the worst. And sometimes it would be just 1 if I was on one of my kind of mini breaks, if you like.
And were you running? I mean, there must have been, because you were gone for so long, there must be times where you were sick or just mentally fatigued, and you were like, look, I don't want to do it, but you kind of you got to do it, right?
I had that quite quickly, actually. And again, this is kind of another bit to the story which I quite like, but it was incredibly foolish of me. I broke my ankle in the October before I left, and I left in January. Late September, October. And I realized running that first marathon in Toronto in Canada, which was minus 25 degrees, by the way, a torrential snowstorm as well, which I wasn't expecting. I ran that marathon having not ran a full marathon distance for 4 months before, which for me was unheard of in my entire life. I was always running marathon distances at least once a week. And through that period, for 2 reasons: because of my broken ankle, I was resting, and for the second reason, I was in this mad panic of making sure everything was organized. And so I kind of just forgot to run. And I got there and I was like, oh crap, I actually not run this distance for nearly half a year, like 4.5 months. And then from there, things just kind of snowballed into kind of a nightmare of me fearing for stuff. And then I started to enjoy it when I got through. It was like a curve, I was struggling, and then my mind kind of caught up and I was in my rhythm, and then things just got difficult because of places like Yemen and Syria. And then it kind of just got really, really tough as the stress towards the end of the trip happened, because the last thing we wanted was to get to 195 countries and then the last country deny me access, or something terrible to go wrong that meant I can't run it and the record would be ruined. For example, a global pandemic, which fortunately didn't happen. I mean, it's not fortunate at all in any state, but fortunately it didn't happen at that point. So in terms of getting ill and that kind of stuff, I had 22 different periods of food poisoning, which is not good over 2 years. You'd maybe have a couple in real life, but I was eating pretty much everything I could get my hands on, which meant I was having many marathons when I was like almost ping-ponging from one bathroom to another, just making sure that everything was okay. And most of the time it wasn't. It was pretty horrendous. And then there was the times when I woke up in Bangladesh. I don't even remember what number it was, but it was very far down the line, and I'd got so used to it, and I just stumbled out of bed feeling, just imagine you have a horrendous flu. I had a kidney infection, I had food poisoning, I was feeling beyond rough, and I just kind of rolled out of bed, and there was 15 people, locals, that wanted to run with me in the lobby downstairs, and I got down and I went, like, guys, I'm really rough, but let's just get through this. And I threw up every single mile, and then I went to bed, got on the next morning, flew to my next country and did it again, and so that kind of stuff was tough. But overall, I think the in terms of what we're talking about with kind of my body not liking what I'm eating, or kind of illness and sickness, the fatigue of having to rely mentally on my own thoughts and my own opinions of should I do this, should I not do that, that was quite a struggle, because when you travel with somebody else or when you're working with somebody else, or even if you're playing sport with somebody else, you can kind of go, well, should we do this or shouldn't we, and have another person's opinion. But traveling on your own, you know, if somebody said to me, oh hi mate, yeah, nice to meet you, let's go out for dinner now, or I've got this great place to go and show you, or oh no, let's go and run here together, I have to put my trust into a complete stranger. And the problem with that is that I always have to double check stuff. I have to be kind of situationally aware that I'm not getting myself into real trouble, which happened, you know, I got close a lot of times. And it was ultimately because I was so tired that I wasn't making all of the right decisions all the time. And things like going to the right airport, you know, there was a couple of instances where I got a taxi to the wrong airport in a city because I was just like tired. And in normal life, you would double check where you're going.
Yeah.
But I would just get in the taxi, fall asleep and wake up and I was at the wrong airport. So, you know, that kind of stuff. But yeah, the list goes on.
And when you were doing the runs, the countries that weren't organised races, were you running with people, or did you sort of have someone on the ground that would be like, okay, you know, we'll meet you wherever you're going to be staying, and then they kind of go with you?
Yeah, so my team did a very good job. So between my parents, my assistant, lots of my team, they linked up a contact in the country that I would have. And I don't think there was any country that I went to where I didn't have a contact, whether it was somebody behind a reception desk, or whether it was a family I was staying with, or whether it was a big group. Like I had in El Salvador, I had 1,000 runners with me. You know, so it ranged from virtually nobody to thousands of people that had been organized. And through the course of the journey, I was kind of having a couple of people meet me, we go and run together. And as it got towards the end, I was having races organized specifically because I was arriving at that time. And so countries would go, well, Nick's arriving on this date, let's arrange a race. And I'd have things like medals with my face on and massive banners and cheering stations. And it was incredible, like absolutely amazing. But that was also another bit of pressure, you know, because we publicized where we were going to be and when. And when those didn't happen, then we'll obviously let some people down. So I was running with people more or less, I would say more or less every time, whether, you know, sometimes it was only for like a mile or two. The rest of the time, you know, there's very few people that ran the whole way with me, but there would be kind of like tag teaming them really.
Yeah. And was there any sort of standout countries? You said it was the people that made the trip. I mean, were there any kind of people, and if you could sort of give like 3 countries that you could pick?
Oh gosh, yeah, wow. Yeah, I could probably name nearly all of the countries that the people with the standout part, because I think if you go around, imagine there's no people on the planet and you travel around it, it's beautiful and peaceful and lovely. But actually, all of the interactions I had and all of the memories are all to do with the amazing people I spoke with. And so I suppose Guatemala is one of the great countries that I love because of the people. I ran around this beautiful erupting volcano in the outskirts of Antigua, and I met a bunch of people there that I've since ran in nearly every continent with one of the other guys, also called Nick. He runs the Impact Marathon series, really great group of marathons all over the world. And he just rocked up at the hotel, saw it on Facebook, and said, well, come and run. And since then, he organised the run in Rwanda with me. And we meet, and we're really good mates now. And so that was something that was quite near the beginning of the trip. Another one was in Barcelona, where a lovely lady called Rowena was listening to the Chris Evans show at 2:00 in the morning when I was recording this. It was morning for the UK, back when I was in Barbados. And Rowena happened to be listening in Spain, and then got in touch with my team and said, when Nick comes to Spain, he can come and stay with me. But what she then did is she offered to then drive me from Spain to Andorra. We then ran in Andorra with some contacts she had there. And then she then took me to Nice as well. And so this amazing woman just kind of linked 3 countries together. And to be honest, that story happened many, many times. I guess the other little story which I really love, and it's a typical display of the benefits of saying yes to stuff and talking to people when you may not necessarily be in the mood to talk. And lots of people will sit on the tube or sit on a train or a bus or an aeroplane for that matter and not talk to each other, but I always make a point of speaking to everybody, because there's amazing people literally all around you. And I chatted to this guy at the end of Silverstone half marathon. around the Silverstone racecourse in the UK. This was about 5 years ago. A guy called Veton, and I just chatted to him. It was raining. We kind of huddled under a hangar, got chatting, and he said, "Oh yeah, no, actually, I'm originally from. I had no idea that this trip would even exist. But I said, yeah, if I'm ever in Kosovo running, I'll look you up." Didn't think that would be happening, obviously. We hadn't said a word at all to each other. We hadn't messaged, we hadn't emailed, we hadn't said a word to each other. It was just a passing, like, this looks like a great guy to know. And then I rocked up in Kosovo, and he met me at the airport. He had been in contact with my team. I didn't know about it. And he met me in the airport. I later then found out that he used to work for the UN. And I now employ him as my assistant. And he got me access to countries that I just would never have access to. And so through that one little conversation, he virtually made that trip possible. So it was, little things like that, which were just mind blowing to me.
That's cool. And is there, presumably there was a lot of crazy stuff that happened, but is there one kind of sort of standout moment that you thought, okay, this is nuts?
Yeah, there's a lot of those. So, being mugged at knife point and at gunpoint, being shot at, being put in a cell, having very close calls with big animals, pretty much, being hit by a car, having broken bones, all of that sort of stuff. Whatever could have happened, apart from me dying, which I'm very grateful didn't happen. There was all sorts of things that just were nuts. But I think the one that stands out the most for me was a really scary moment when I was going over the border from Beirut from Amman into Yemen. And I needed to go, this was quite close to the end of the trip. And we hired a guy to drive me from Oman through the Omani mountains at night to get to the border. Supposed to be staying in a hotel. That the hotel turned out to be just a building site, and that building site was terrible. It was pretty scary. There was just beautiful mountains, but camels roaming around and kind of gunfire in the distance. And we went through these checkpoints, as you do, kind of very strange checkpoints, lots of military, lots of dogs, lots of weapons. And I was pretty scared, because not only for my life, but for kind of being locked up. I didn't want to be in Yemen and be locked up for doing something wrong. Because that's more scary than being shot, in my opinion, because people have been locked up for pretty much nothing and haven't seen their families for a long, long time. And I didn't want to ruin the trip. And it happened that we were going over the border, and there was some commotion, and the driver was speaking with or shouting with the officials, and I didn't know what was going on. And it turned out that the driver was attempting to smuggle drugs into the country without me knowing about it, and kind of used me as an excuse, used me as a mule, if you like. And having that moment on the border of Yemen, on Yemeni soil, with massive AKs and lots of shouting and being dragged out the car, and it was scary. It was really scary. Unfortunately, it ended with him having to give over everything he was trying to smuggle in, and then we got through. But then, of course, I had the worry that what would happen when we try and get back. Are we going to be allowed out, or are they going to extort us? What's going to happen? And unfortunately, we got out and it was okay. But going in was a really, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning. It was dark and everybody was menacing. So yeah, it was pretty scary.
Wow. And now looking back, you're saying, if we're going to do the trip again, there's so many things that you've learned. I mean, what advice would you give people who are looking to travel to these kind of places? And
yeah, I think the main thing is to say yes to it, and to definitely travel to all of these places. Especially, I get a few messages from kind of solo female travelers who are scared to go to some places, and in some places rightfully so, because traveling alone anyway is not particularly safe. Even in Western society, in Europe, for example, things can go wrong. But it's just about having backup plans. I always had my trackers with me. I always had that kind of security level there. But there's also trusting your instincts and stuff. But I think the biggest thing I learned about travel is it opens up so many just great kind of joyful moments, whether it's seeing a sunset, whether it's having a conversation with somebody about, I was chatting with a guy when I was running in Bosnia, and he'd seen the Bosnian War, he'd fought, it was this old man it was just the most kind of enlightening conversation. And so I would urge every single person, I'm not kind of on a rampage to get everybody out running, but at the same time, I do think that's a pretty cool way of seeing the world. But just being able to get a little bit further out of your comfort zone and experience that buzz of landing in an airport where you can't read any signs because it's all in a different language and you haven't been prepared. You're in shorts when it's torrential rain and it's cold, and all of that stuff that is inevitably going to happen when you travel. Is I think the best stuff, and it's kind of all the serendipitous moments that you remember forever. And I suppose just to top that question off, I had a moment when I got back from so my first year, obviously there's nearly 2 years of traveling, and I got back on a few days before Christmas to wait for a new visa. I had 3 or 4 days in the UK, had some Christmas dinner with my family, and on Christmas morning I had messages from people that I'd met from around the world. I did 100 countries, 100 marathons in 100 countries in year one, and on that Christmas morning I had 61 different people from 61 different nationalities message me on Christmas Day wishing me happy Christmas. So I think if that's not a reason to travel, what is? It's just so incredibly grateful to have that opportunity.
Nice. And I mean, especially with what's going on now, with no one being able to.
COVID, I know, and everything that's happened. I mean, in our lifetimes, I hope it never happens again, but I can't imagine anything is going to come close to the world being shut down, and not just not being able to go to the pub, but not being able to see your family or your neighbors or go outside, and especially living in a van during lockdown and trying to keep isolated, driving down a road and not seeing anybody for 2 or 3 hours was absolutely surreal. It definitely felt like an apocalyptic film. And so, there was a whole extra level, and I've got my theatre tour, my speaking tour, which is reigniting speaking in schools and businesses and venues around the country for the next year now, when that starts up again. And I'll be talking a little more about the kind of privilege that I have to be able to have done that. Mm-hmm. And also the urge to try and get other people to do something similar, in a sense of not just being in your backyard your whole life, just go that little bit extra and see what it's like, and hopefully the world will open up again, and people will have appreciated everything that they've got.
Cool. And you've just launched your book, Running the World. Do you touch on that sort of privileged side in the book as well, or is it about the journey, and what are the main kind of sort of topics there?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the book, when I was writing the book, I wrote about 150,000 words too many, because my publisher said, you've got this many words, you can't go over them, and inevitably I did, because I've got too many stories. But yeah, it touches on a little bit of background, the kind of the journey, and also a lot of my philosophy and the privilege and my experiences in each place. I try not to touch on the classical things within each place, because you can read those in any book. It's more my feelings that I had in each place. A classic example is being in Syria and expecting to have this scary experience within Damascus, and I ended up running with the under-19s female national football team. It's just bonkers. And so that kind of stuff, those kind of stories, just kind of, that's what the book is about. It's sharing the journey, my experiences, and hopefully giving everybody a nudge to I don't want people just to quit their jobs and travel around the world, but it's something that I would recommend, so I hope that's what will leave people with the feeling of when they finish reading.
Cool. And once you've done the speaking tour, are they what's next? I mean, you've done this, are you thinking about what's going to top that? Are there any other challenges, whether it be running or something else that you're working on?
Yeah, so between now and the end of next year, we have the speaking tour, and littered amongst that, we have 6, maybe even 7 or 8, depending on how much I can squeeze in, mini challenges. So running the length of running north to south of Malawi, circumnavigating Iceland, circumnavigating Bali, doing Land's End to John O'Groats, doing the Camino Way. Those kind of things are smaller. They're one country at a time, and they're not overly endurance-y. But I'm going to try and do them quickest and try and break some records. But I'm really doing that as part of a training for the bigger picture, which is for what's coming next. So once the next 16 months has lapsed, that's when things get a little bit more serious for me. And then a year after that again is when I'm taking on my next big expedition, which I can't tell you exactly what it is because I've been sponsored.
You got to tell me something.
My sponsors, but it's going to be a lot more running, and it's going to be pretty. I can say that it is. It's a lot of running, and it's North America based. It's not just running in every state. It's not something like that. It's a little bit unique. It's not been done before. It's going to be hopefully another 4 world records and a big world first. It's the world first I'm most excited about. And I'll be releasing the details probably by the end of the year. I'm just trying to keep it under my hat because there's a lot of stuff that has to be planned, and I also have to definitely commit to it before I talk about it.
Would you say is it more ambitious than the last one, or probably same sort of level?
Can you still hear?
Yeah. Would you say is it just as ambitious as running every country in the world? If that's
in terms of endurance, in terms of running, I know. I think it's endurance wise, physically on my body. I think it is I would say about 100 times harder what I'm about to try and do. And it's definitely going to be the hardest physical feat I will probably ever take on. But in terms of logistical, it's going to be difficult, but hopefully not as challenging as the last one.
That's great.
Fingers crossed.
Cool. And if people want to follow you and keep in contact with what you're up to and your journey, what's the best way? Would it be by is it social media would be the best way of getting in contact? Would be is it via Instagram or?
So my website is kind of the.
So it would be on your website.
My website is obviously like kind of the hub of everything, nickbutter.com. But my Instagram, nickbutterrun. Can you hear me? Yeah. Nick Butter Run on Instagram is the best way forward. You can see all of the stories, all of the little challenges that I'm setting myself every month, and things like this month I'm doing 600 miles and 10,000 push-ups, which is a stupid challenge because I've never done them before and it's horrible. But it's just a nice little challenge to kind of keep me on my toes. And it's a good way of knowing where I am in the country or where I am in the world. So if people want to come and run with me, so find me on Instagram. It's Nick Butter Run. Say hello, and hopefully we can do stuff together. Awesome,
cool, Nick. Well, thanks for coming on. It's been great to chat, and I hope everything goes well when the talking tour starts again. And good luck with planning everything for the new challenge as well.
No, thank you very much, Ollie. I'll have to rope you into doing a few miles with me on the next challenge. So
cool,
take care, mate. Thank you so much.
Cheers, mate.